Today we're making homemade non-toxic glue. This is a super fun and safe option for anyone who wants a green alternative to store-bought glue, especially when you're crafting with little ones. This is made with stuff that you probably already have in your kitchen, and you can whip it up really quickly. It takes 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 1 cup of cool water, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt to help preserve the glue and let it last longer. Now place your saucepan on the stovetop with the heat on low. Keep stirring consistently as the mixture thickens. It's going to take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes. We'll know it's finished when it reaches a consistency similar to porridge. And there you have it. Our glue is completely finished in a short amount of time. See how it has that nice porridge-like consistency? Now let it cool completely and then store it in an airtight container in the fridge, and this is going to help it last for a week or two. Now let's put this glue to the test. I'll show you how well it works. I'm using a paintbrush to apply a thin layer of glue to the back of the piece of paper and another piece of homemade paper. I'm going to press them together gently, let them dry just like you would regular glue. I'm always surprised at how well this homemade glue bonds paper together. This is a fantastic DIY project to do with your kids, especially younger ones, since it's completely non-toxic and there's no worry if they get a little bit on their hands or even in their mouth. This glue works best on paper projects, cardboard creations, and other lightweight materials. Cleanup is a breeze. Simply wash your tools and surfaces with warm water and a little bit of soap. This homemade glue is a fantastic, eco-friendly alternative for all of your crafting needs, perfect for you, and especially fun to make with kids. And if you're looking to color your glue, which would be a fun twist for the kids to do, you can add a few drops of food coloring to your mixture while it's still warm. This is a fun way to add a decorative touch to your projects, especially when working with kids. I set this aside to dry and it bonded firmly to the paper. It may not be quite as strong as store-bought glue, but that makes it a perfect project for a rainy day with your kids or your grandkids. Just seal it up in an airtight container and pop it in the fridge when you're finished. Today I'm going to show you how you can make homemade Mod Podge. And you can also make a homemade Mod Podge with glossy or a matte finish or semi-gloss. I'm going to show you how you can do that. What you're going to need is you're going to need some Elmer's school glue, some measuring cups, a tablespoon, and you're also going to need some polyacrylic sealer. Now you want to make sure that you have some airtight containers, and this will last a long time for you once you make it up. You just got to make sure that they have a good seal on them. I got these little ones at the dollar store. I think they came in a pack of 3 and they're really handy for, because I don't want to make a great big container of it, so this is a nice size. The first one that we're going to make is just the regular homemade Mod Podge. Elmer's school glue, any type of school glue will work. You can pick it up at the dollar store, or the no-name brand works good too. And I like to do 2 to 1. So we're going to do 2 parts glue to 1 part water. I'm just going to pour that in there. Use my little spoon to scrape it out. And then we're going to put in 1/4 cup of water. And I'll see if I can do this without spilling. No, it's spilling. There we go. And then you're just going to put the lid on. Shake. Shake really well. Incorporate that water and that glue together. And you have homemade Mod Podge. That's it. That is it to making homemade Mod Podge. Now you can adjust the water either way for your projects. And it won't change how it works too much. If you're finding it's a little bit too thin for the project that you're working on, add a little bit of glue. You can be flexible with it, and it works really well, and it's affordable. So the next one I'm going to show you is the glossy or matte, and what it does is it just will give your Mod Podge, your homemade Mod Podge, a bit of a sheen to it. When you're just using the glue and the water, it's just a flat, dries flat. Where if you can add a little bit of polyacrylic sealer, it will give it a little bit more of a sheen on your project. Just depends on what you're trying to go for. Same mixture again. We're doing the school glue for 1/2 cup. We're going to put in 1/4 of a cup of the water. And I'll see if I can spill it all over again. I guess I should have grabbed something that had a spout on it to make it pour easier. There we go. And then you want to add in 2 tablespoons of your polyacrylic sealer. And again, it depends on the project that you're working on, what kind of a sheen you want on it. This that I have right here is satin, so it's just going to have a nice satin finish to it. But if you want something glossier, then use a glossy polyacrylic sealer. We're going to put the lid on, shake it up really well, and that's it to your homemade Mod Podge. And I'm just going to show you a project that I did with my homemade Mod Podge. This is just a tin can that I spray painted white, and then I just tore up some paper towel and decoupaged it onto the tin with my homemade Mod Podge, and then painted it, and it gave it a really lovely texture. Worked really well, and it's a lot cheaper than buying the Mod Podge. Today I'm excited to share with you a DIY recipe for waterproof Mod Podge and how you can use it in your crafting projects. Whether you're making outdoor decor, fabric crafts, or functional items, this waterproof Mod Podge alternative is going to add durability, water resistance to your creations. To make your waterproof Mod Podge, you're going to need some Elmer's school glue, some clear 100% silicone. I found mine at Walmart, but you can also find it at Amazon or your local hardware store. A little bit of water, a sponge or a palette knife, and a dish along with a spoon that you keep just in your craft room and is not used in your kitchen. You're going to take that Elmer's school glue and add 1 tablespoon to the dish. You can also use the clear school glue or PVA glue, whatever you have, and you can even use Mod Podge if you have that in your craft room. But if you want a more affordable product, use a school glue, it works well. Then we're going to use that 100% silicone, and we're going to do equal amounts. So 1 tablespoon of the silicone added to that school glue. Now you want to incorporate that glue and silicone together really well. It takes a little bit to get them mixed together, so just take your time and make sure it's nice and smooth when you're finished. Now this is where you can add a little bit of water. I'm using about a teaspoon and adding it to the glue and silicone mixture. You want to be really careful not to add too much water because it's going to take away from the waterproof properties of this mixture. So use it sparingly. We're adding just enough water so that it can be applied onto our project easier and it's going to flow on better. This is the right consistency for applying to your project. Ensure you're using a paintbrush and dishes dedicated to crafting because silicone is not food grade and will dry hard, making it difficult to clean your brush and your dishes. Today I'm going to demonstrate this project using one of my homemade DIY napkins and a piece of cotton fabric. You need to use something that's going to absorb that mixture. If you're using a material where the waterproofing solution won't soak in, it won't work. I have a full tutorial on how to make your own DIY napkins. I'll put the link right here that you can scan, or you can find it below in the description. This is a perfect project to test this waterproof Mod Podge on. I've also designed this graphic and it's available in my Etsy store. I love the vintage feel of it, and I've cut it off of this piece of computer paper, and there we have created our own DIY napkin that we can now apply to the fabric using the waterproof homemade Mod Podge. Now I want to make sure that I have the napkin exactly where I want it after I put on that Mod Podge waterproof solution. So I'm going to be marking the 4 corners to see where to lay it afterwards. Now we're going to stir that mixture again, and I like to apply it using a sponge. You can also use a palette knife, a credit card, or if you have an old paintbrush that you don't care about, you can use that too. Otherwise, it's just going to have to get thrown out. I'm going to place it in between those 4 corners and make sure that that waterproof Mod Podge gets soaked right through that fabric. Before using this waterproof Mod Podge alternative on your project, it's essential to conduct a small piece on a scrap piece of material or on the project you're going to be using it on to make sure that it's going to work and give you the desired waterproofing level. You can use this waterproof Mod Podge alternative on so many different crafting projects, including outdoor decor, flower pots, fabric crafts, paper crafts, jewelry making, holiday decorations, upcycled projects that you want to keep outside. So many possibilities. I've completely covered the fabric where we're going to place that napkin, and I'm going to gently press it down into the mixture, using my fingers to smooth out any bubbles and wrinkles. I also like to use a bit of saran wrap to prevent any ripping or tearing if I press too hard. Just pat it up and down to smooth it out and ensure a nice finish without tearing that napkin. While this waterproof Mod Podge alternative is great for making your crafts more durable and water resistant, it might not survive the washing machine. It's best to gently wash items by hand using soap and water, avoid soaking them for too long, and gently pat them dry. If you think you're going to be washing them a lot or exposing them to tough conditions, consider a fabric sealant made for waterproofing and washing instead. I let that sit for about 15 or 20 minutes, and now I'm going back in and I'm sponging on a top coat, spreading it evenly across the top of the napkin, trying to reach the edges. If we don't seal it around the edge, it could possibly lift and peel away, so we want to make sure we're getting that Mod Podge waterproof alternative right out to the edge of the napkin and applying it liberally across that whole project. In addition to the steps we've covered, here are a few extra pointers to ensure your best results. First, allow the project to dry completely before handling it to prevent any smudges or smears. Depending on the thickness of the application, drying time may vary, but generally allowing it to dry overnight is a good practice once you're all finished. For optimal waterproofing, consider applying multiple coats, allowing each layer to dry thoroughly before adding the next. Be sure to store any leftover mixture in an airtight container to prevent it from drying out, and you can use it later. When cleaning your brushes or sponges after use, wash them thoroughly with warm soapy water, as a silicone component can harden if you leave it to dry. Warm soapy water can help remove silicone, but it will not remove it entirely. For thorough cleaning, you may need to use a solvent specifically designed to dissolve silicone, such as mineral spirits or rubbing alcohol. As you can see, I let this dry, and now I'm going in and putting on a second coat to ensure that it's going to withstand water and repel it. I love using this formula for coating plant pots that I'm going to keep outside in the elements. It allows you to have pretty flower pots that won't melt away from rain, moisture, or extreme heat. It's been 24 hours, and here is our graphic on this piece of cotton fabric. It's durable and flexible now. The silicone component in it gives it a bit of a slippery feel on the top. As you can see, I put it under water and it's repelling the water, it's bubbling off and not soaking through. I live in Canada, so this isn't an issue for me, but if you have exposure to really strong sunlight or UV, this can cause it to degrade over time. This means it may not work as well on repelling water and keeping your projects protected. If you're using it for outdoor crafts in that type of an area with lots of sun, keep it in mind. Maybe adding extra layers of the mixture or using a UV resistant sealant on top instead might work better for you. As you can see, it's covered in water. I'm just taking the cloth and wiping that water right off the top, and it's not affecting the graphic on the cotton. This is such a fun DIY for you to try out and add to your to-do list in your craft room. How you can DIY your own rub and buff. It's gotten very popular over the last little bit, but it's really expensive to buy those little tubes, and you're limited to only the color that you've bought that little tube in. So I'm going to show you today how you can make it in a variety of different colors really affordably, and you can transform your DIY projects with it. The first thing that you're going to need is some shoe polish. Now, I picked this up off of Amazon. I like using the clear, but you can also get different colors that would add different textures and different looks to your DIY buff. I'll put the link to that down below in the description. You're also gonna need some mica powder. Mine were almost gone, so I just bought a new pack so I could show you all the different colors. We've got gold and different hues of silver and some black and white. All of this can be turned into DIY rub and buff. You're gonna need a surface to mix it up, a little spatula, a mixing tool, and a little container to keep your rub and buff in after you've made it. And you're gonna need a couple little rags. So you can also find shoe polish in different colors. I actually found this in the clearance rack at our drugstore, and it is black, and you can add maybe some silver metallic. That would be really neat with this. Now this is more of a cream, but it will still work to mix up and turn into a rub and buff. And this one is more of a brown color. You just get different looks with different shades of the shoe polish. For today, we're just gonna use the clear. So you're gonna take, and there's not really a set recipe for this. You're just gonna mix it until you get the color that you like. I'm gonna be using this gold mica powder, and we're just going to incorporate it into the shoe polish and just mix it until you think you've got the color that you like. And it's as simple as that. And you can mix and match different colors and put it together until you're happy with it. See, I've got this batch finished. I used about half of the mica powder out of this little vial, and you can just mix it until it's completely incorporated. And then I have these little containers. You can put it in the container and you can store it for when you're ready to use on your DIY project. So I have this vase that I painted with some baking soda paint, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when you add some of this rub and buff. Now you can use your fingers too, but I'm just using a little rag just to show you what it does, and it's just leaving a really beautiful shimmer on your project, and you just rub it up and down. It's going to go into all of those little nooks and crannies and leave that shimmer. It's just beautiful. It's just subtle. If you want it to be more, you can add more of that mica powder or metallic powder if you have, and just fool around with it. I'm gonna work away at finishing this vase, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all finished. And it's given it a really beautiful shimmer just with that DIY rub and buff. I've also got a chalk painted wine bottle, and I'm just going to show you what it does on a white surface. Again, we're just going to get our little cloth and just rub it in. And of course, this is rub and buff. So the more that you rub it, the shinier it's going to be, the more sheen you're going to get. You're going to have beautiful results. So you can see the gold shimmer that it's given to this chalk painted bottle, and it goes a long way. You don't need very much, just work it in, and then when you set it aside and let it dry, the wax from the shoe polish is going to harden up and be a durable finish. Isn't that beautiful? Just gives it a little, you can see from here, there's some there, and it's the difference. I also have this old metal, I think it's brass, that I found in the scrap metal bin, and I was working away on it too, and this has nothing on it, and I started working away on this side, and look at the shimmer and the shine that it's brought up in that brass. I'll do a piece here so you can see the difference. And it just gives it a really nice shimmer and cleans it all up. Of course, this is not going to be food safe, so you don't want to do it on anything that you're going to be serving food on. This is for decor only. I'm going to mix up a small batch just to show you the difference with the different colors. We're going to add some silver into this one. incorporate it all together. There, and I've just mixed up a little tiny batch. Gonna add a little bit more of that mica powder, incorporating it right in. And I have a flower pot that I'm going to test this color on. This is one that I've picked up at the thrift store. We're just going to use our little rag and just rub it in. And it just sits in those little nooks and crannies and looks fantastic. Just gives it some depth and some sheen. So that's using a little bit of a darker shoe polish. And then I also have the black. So let's mix up some of the black and put it beside this one, and we'll test the two together. This is the cream shoe polish. I'm just gonna squeeze some out. We don't need very much. White, let's do that one. See what kind of a shimmer we get with it. Oh, this one's really nice. This one might be my favorite. It just takes a little bit of time to rub it in and get it all in all those little corners. But look at that, isn't that beautiful? So we've got the brown, we've got the black, and then we tried the clear. So perfect recipe to make your own DIY rub and buff. Candle wax is a fantastic technique for creating a vintage look with chipped paint. First, we're going to be painting this scrap piece of wood with some homemade black chalk paint. Once it dries completely, we're going to grab a wax pillar candle, mine's just from the dollar store, and we're going to rub it into areas where it would have naturally shown wear and tear over time. You want to apply some pressure. Rub that white wax candle directly on that wood, focusing on the areas where you want that chippy effect to show through. Yeah, you can go in the middle also. Remember, stick to white wax. Colored wax can tint your project, and that's not what we're going for. If you're having trouble transferring the wax, no worries. Just heat the tip of your white candle slightly with a lighter and it'll glide right along the wood. As you can see, I've applied a generous amount of wax to create a heavily chipped vintage look on this brand new piece of wood. Paint time. I've got two acrylic colors that I think are going to work beautifully together. The first coat goes right on top of that candle wax. Here's the trick. Anywhere with paint over the wax will show the color underneath when we chip it away. After letting this paint dry completely, we're going to reapply that candle wax, focusing on areas where we want that chipped effect. Using the lighter again if we need to help to transfer that wax, and then we're going to put on our final coat of paint. Don't forget to paint over the entire piece with your final coat right on top of the wax. This is such a budget-friendly way to achieve a chippy paint effect, and the best part, most of us already have candles lying around that are perfect for this technique. All right, let's see the magic happen. Once everything is dry, grab your scraper and get ready to reveal those layers. See how I'm scraping away? We're uncovering four beautiful colors: the natural wood grain, the black base coat, the turquoise layer, and finally that yellow. Anywhere with wax will resist the paint, leaving that color beneath exposed. We transformed this brand new wood into a perfectly aged chippy masterpiece, the ideal base for one of my signs. For a final touch, I like to smooth everything out with my palm sander using 80 grit sandpaper. This also removes any wax that I might have missed while scraping. What do you think? I absolutely love this technique. This beginner technique delivers professional looking results. Sign time. I printed out this design using my laser printer on regular computer paper. I sized it perfectly in Google Docs. Now I'll be using my Mod Podge mat to adhere it to our chippy masterpiece. By the way, this design is available in my Etsy shop if you want to use the same one, but if you're creating your own graphic, be sure to mirror the text before printing. Otherwise, your words will appear backwards when you transfer them. Once you've applied the Mod Podge to the back of your printed image, remember, print it on regular computer paper and printed backwards. Carefully place it on your sign using your fingers to gently smooth out any bubbles or wrinkles. We want everything nice and even for a flawless transfer. This is just one way to personalize your Chippy masterpiece. You can use a Cricut to create your own design or apply this technique to a piece of furniture for a vintage makeover. No matter how you choose to do it, the results are amazing. After letting the Mod Podge dry for 24 hours, I simply wet the paper and gently rub it off. And as you do this, the magic happens and your design is transferred onto the chippy piece of wood. Once all the paper is removed, I'm adding some extra pizzazz. Using some acrylic paint, I'm filling in that lemon graphic to make it pop with some color and texture. And our sign is finished. Ice cold lemonade. I think the candle wax technique really adds to that vintage vibe, giving it that authentic chippy feel. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts about this technique down in the comments below. Another fantastic way to achieve a chippy paint effect, using packing tape and candle wax. Remember how we used this technique earlier? This time we're using some scrap pine stained with a rich brown for a beautiful base, and we need some packing tape, candle wax, and of course some acrylic paint. Here's how this technique works. First, I'll grab a white taper candle and rub the wax all over my stained pine, focusing on areas that would naturally show wear. Then we're going to completely cover that wood with acrylic paint, making sure to get all the way to the edges. The magic happens here. Anywhere with wax, the paint won't stick. When we remove the paint, it's going to reveal these gorgeous chipped areas underneath. But the secret weapon for this technique is packing tape. Now let's add some depth to our chippy effect. Once the first layer of paint is completely dry, we're going to apply that second layer of white wax, covering the entire surface from top to bottom, making sure it reaches to the edges. Now grab your second paint color and completely cover the wood, again getting right to the edges. This is going to create 3 beautiful layers of potential chippiness: the original stained wood, the first coat of paint, and the second coat of paint that we just applied. Remember, the magic of packing tape is going to come into play really soon. Now for the secret weapon, packing tape. Carefully lay that packing tape over the dried acrylic paint. You want to make sure your paint layers are completely dry, smoothing it down firmly as you go. You might need 2 or 3 pieces to cover your entire surface, depending on how big your project is. And this is what makes this technique so fantastic. You can achieve a chippy effect without any sanding or mess. It's perfect if you don't have access to a sander or you simply want to avoid the dust. Once all the packing tape is applied, grab a credit card or another stiff object. Now comes the important part. We need to create a strong bond between the tape and the wax. Use the credit card to firmly press down on the tape, making sure it adheres well to the entire surface. All right, here comes the exciting part. Very carefully peel off that packing tape. Don't toss it. This tape with its colorful paint flecks is perfect for adding a unique touch to your junk journals, mixed media projects, or any paper crafting that you do. Look at this gorgeous chippy effect starting to appear on our wood. This technique works like a charm. Now let's tear away the tape on this next piece and see how it comes off. It comes in one clean piece. We've got a beautiful piece of tape for crafting and a stunning piece of chippy wood ready for the next step. Now let's add some more chippiness to this pink piece. I'm going to add another layer of white wax here and there, focusing on areas where I want more chipping. And then I'll add another light coat of paint, let it dry completely, and then hopefully the packing tape will grab onto those waxed areas when we apply it again, creating an even more fantastic chip as we peel it off. The beauty of this technique, you can keep adding and removing tape, just applying it wherever you want more chipping and then peel it off to reveal the effect. Since we're avoiding sanders with this technique, here's a handy trick. I'll use the edge of my scissors to gently scrape along the edges of the wood. This is going to reveal some of that beautiful raw wood and brown stain underneath, adding a touch of extra detail and perfectly distressed finish. Plus, no messy sanding required. We've created a stunning piece of distressed wood, all thanks to the power of packing tape. Here's another fun way to create a chippy finish with baby wipes. This is a fantastic technique because it's so easy. There's no mess and no sanding required. I picked up this frame at the thrift store. It's made of a pressed foam board. It's very light. I'm going to remove the back and the print, set them aside, and this is going to allow me to show you this technique on the bare frame itself. Everything's removed and now we're ready to tackle this technique. I'm using my homemade black chalk paint. I find the chalk paint works best for this technique because it adheres really well to any surface. I have a full tutorial on how to make your own DIY chalk paint. I'll put the QR code right here you can scan or down below in the description. The key to this technique is not letting your chalk paint dry completely. You want it to be slightly tacky to the touch. And then grab your baby wipe and start wiping away in the areas that it would naturally show wear and tear. Think of the high points on the frame. This is where you want to get artistic. Use your eye to see what looks best. You'll see the paint chipping away and revealing a distressed tarnished look. Play around with it to achieve the perfect amount of chipping that you want for your frame. Another great thing about this technique is that you can't make mistakes. If you don't like the way it's turning out, you can simply paint over it and start fresh. I think it needs another layer of dark black chalk paint, so I'm adding a light coat. I'm going to set it aside until it's dry, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to dry brush on some white chalk paint on top of the black. I want a light coat that allows the black and the gold to peek through in some areas. Now go back in with a baby wipe and start rubbing again on any areas where you want different layers of paint to peek through. Baby wipes are a fantastic tool for distressing any painted DIY project. Simply use a damp baby wipe to remove the paint selectively, creating a softened and aged appearance. You can also use a damp cloth, but I find baby wipes with a mild soap solution work even better for removing paint. What do you think about this technique? This might be one of my favorite ways to achieve a chippy, cracked finish on wood, and it involves a hairspray hack. I've got a piece of raw pine ready. First, I'm going to base coat it with some black homemade chalk paint, let it dry completely, and then I'm going to layer up a couple different colors of chalk paint on top. True chippy wood seldom has just one layer of paint. To mimic that authentic aged look, we always need to layer on 2 or 3 different paint colors. All these coats of paint are completely dry. Now we're ready for the hairspray hack. Any type of hairspray, pump or aerosol will work, but I find the extra hold works best. You also need a water bottle filled with some water, some acrylic paint, which is crucial. You have to have acrylic paint, and a stencil brush. Grab your hairspray. We want to saturate that wood with a thick layer. Give it 3 or 4 good coats to make sure that it's nice and wet, and then set it aside and let it dry. Now that the hairspray is completely dry, let's grab our acrylic paint. This technique only works with acrylics, so resist the urge to use latex or chalk paint. They won't create that desired crackled, distressed effect. The thicker you apply the acrylic paint, the larger the cracks will be. A thinner layer creates finer crackles. Apply it based on your desired effect. Now that it's completely dry, look at those fabulous, authentic looking cracks. Imagine a tug-of-war between 2 layers on your wood. The hairspray dries fast, forming a thin, almost plastic wrap that traps water underneath. Then comes the acrylic paint. It dries hard on top, like a stiff cardboard. And as the paint dries, it shrinks a tiny bit, pulling against that wet layer trapped by the hairspray. This pulling force is so strong that it cracks the paint on top, revealing that color underneath and creating that really cool aged look. Now I'm going to grab a squirt bottle filled with warm water. I'll spray it onto the acrylic paint, and then I'm going to use a stencil brush to gently rub away some of that paint. This helps create more of an authentic look and allows the underlying colors to show through. The black, the mustard yellow, and that rust. This technique can be a bit tricky. Remember, always use acrylic paint on top, and once you've mastered it, you can take your signs to the next level, and they sell so much better if you're a reseller. Here's a tip: if you're using this technique on furniture or a DIY project, seal it with some water-based polyacrylic sealer for extra protection. I used the Mod Podge reverse technique on this sign, and it turned out fantastic. After it was finished, I put on a coat of that polyacrylic sealer, and this is one of my favorite ways to create that authentic chippy look. Let me know down in the comments which one's your favorite so far. This crackle and distress technique might be familiar, but a reminder is always helpful. Here I'm using a scrap piece of wood painted with some homemade black chalk paint as the base for our project. We'll be using the classic Elmer's glue crackle technique. Super easy even for beginners. All you need is some PVA glue. Elmer's is the most popular brand, and you can use either white or clear. You can drizzle the Elmer's glue over your project or brush it on with a paintbrush. The thickness of the glue application determines the size of the crackles. Thicker glue creates thicker crackles and vice versa. Once applied, set it aside and let it dry until it's tacky. You know it's ready when you touch the glue and it doesn't come off on your finger. With the glue dried, we're ready for the chalk paint. Apply the paint with long strokes, avoiding mixing it with the glue. For optimal crackling, resist the urge to go back and forth, or you're going to incorporate that glue into the paint and it's not going to crackle. 1 or 2 thick coats from the end to end will be enough. The magic happens fast. Cracks are already appearing, as you can see here, even though it's only been a few minutes. Set it aside, resist the urge to touch, and let the crackle work its magic. The magic behind the crackle is pretty cool. The glue we use dries faster than the paint, so it shrinks underneath. Think of it like the paint is a sheet of a bumpy bed. As the glue shrinks, it pulls on the paint, causing it to crackle and form those awesome lines we see. The thicker the glue, the bigger the cracks, the bigger the bumps under the sheet, making bigger cracks on top. Now we'll transform this crackled piece into a sign. I printed the graphics on my regular computer paper using my laser printer and sized them perfectly for the project in Google Docs. Following the Mod Podge method, I adhered them with the Mod Podge mat and let them sit for 24 hours. Here's the tricky part with the crackle technique. Too much water can reactivate the glue, so take your time adding minimal water as you gently rub off the paper. This graphic is available in my Etsy shop. For easy access, I've included the link in the description below and a QR code right here on the screen. Grab it and create something beautiful for yourself. This is a fantastic way to create crackle effects quickly and achieve stunning results. Today I'm going to show you a magical way to add texture to your DIY projects with just baking soda and vinegar. I'm going to walk you through the whole process and you're not going to believe how amazing it turns out. Here's a frame I found at the thrift store. We're going to give it a makeover and transform it into a vintage piece with a chippy, old, authentic look. It's made of wood, so first we're going to sand it down some, and then we're going to base coat it with some acrylic paint. You can use any type of paint you prefer. It doesn't matter. Now we're going to move on to the baking soda. I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons of the baking soda. All right, now for the water. Let's add 2 tablespoons and mix this up good and get all the baking soda incorporated. We want a thicker paste, so you might need to add another spoonful of baking soda also, like I did here, to get the texture that we're going for. All right, it's time to paint the paste onto the frame. Don't worry about creating a specific pattern or making sure that you have it all covered. We just want to splotch it on randomly. We have some areas with a thicker application and some thinner, and there's no real right or wrong way of applying this baking soda. This technique can, of course, be used on furniture, on frames, on vases, and more. Just let your imagination run wild. Here comes the magic ingredient. I filled a small spray bottle with some vinegar, and we're going to lightly mist that baking soda with the vinegar. As you do this, the baking soda will activate and fizz, creating even more texture. Just a light mist is all you need, and then we're going to set the frame aside and let it dry completely. I typically let it sit overnight, or you can put it out in the sun and it will dry quicker. The baking soda will harden and adhere firmly to that frame. Now it's time to start painting. You can unleash your creativity and use any color you like to create a fun, textured, chippy finish. I wasn't sure if this green paint from my stash would work, but I knew it would pop on camera, so I chose it to demonstrate this technique. I've applied the first coat of acrylic paint, and then we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. Even while that paint dries, you can already see that chippy texture forming. The surface is rough and bubbly in some areas, creating that perfect chippy layered paint effect we're aiming for. Additionally, as that acrylic paint dries, it may shrink slightly, revealing that color underneath too, creating some beautiful crackles. Like I mentioned earlier, there's no right or wrong way to approach this technique. Just keep working on it until you've achieved the desired effect. Now I'm using a 120 grit sandpaper to sand down the areas where the frame would have naturally shown signs of aging. This removes some of the baking soda, sometimes revealing that original wood or the white paint underneath. Keep sanding until you're happy with the results. You can also use a scraper to remove small bits of baking soda here and there and exposing the colors below. This is a fantastic way to learn how to create a chippy paint finish with readily available household items, eliminating the need to go out and buy any special materials or solutions. This is just one of many texturizing techniques I've covered in my tutorials. I've shown you how to use packing tape, candle wax, and even baby wipes to create chippy paint effects. And this technique is just something to add to your toolbox and experiment with to see which one you prefer. This technique is definitely one of my favorite ways to add that antique touch to your DIY projects, but there are so many creative ways to add texture, and I would love to know your favorite techniques. Tell me in the comments what's worked well for you when you've been creating textured DIY pieces. To further enhance that chippy antique look, we're going to use some DIY stain. I've mixed some acrylic paint with water and I'm dabbing a sponge in it to cover that entire frame. This is going to tone down that stark white. And while that paint is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle on some instant coffee. This coffee is going to melt into that water and stain, adding another layer of antique charm. Remember, all of these steps are just optional, so feel free to experiment and see what you like the best. Let the instant coffee melt into that stain, and as it does, it will spread and create a beautiful aged look. Once dry, I'm going to gently brush away the coffee granules for some added texture. And to further enhance the distressed effect, I'm going to use some watered down acrylic stain, again applying with a sponge, and I'm getting really happy with the way that this is turning out. This technique wouldn't be quite the same without this baking soda magic underneath. The baking soda really helps create that awesome texture and vintage look that we're going for. This is a crucial step. Sealing the project is essential. I'm using some Liquitex gloss medium today, but you can also use polyacrylic sealer or Mod Podge, whatever you choose. Make sure to seal the entire piece effectively. I'm even going to add a touch of acrylic paint to that gloss medium to create more of a sepia toned top coat. Now we're going to simply paint this mixture over the entire frame to ensure that everything is really well sealed. I understand that not everyone here is a fan of the chippy look. However, my goal is to teach you techniques that you can add to your repertoire. Maybe you'll have a project in the future where you want to create texture or achieve a specific chippy effect. That's the beauty of these tutorials. They're affordable and they're versatile. The focus isn't on the specific style, but rather teaching you the technique itself. Okay, now let's show you what I'm going to do with this frame. I've got a piece of cotton fabric and I'm going to cut it out so it fits the back of the frame. I'm going to transfer an image onto the fabric and then add it to the back of the frame. I printed off some of my own graphics available in my Etsy store. It's a beautiful bakery graphic and I've sized it to fit on the inside of my frame using a label sheet and my laser printer. There's a full tutorial for this technique. I'll put the link in the description below and a QR code here, both taking you directly to the video tutorial. Now I'm going to mark where that graphic is going to go because we're going to be applying some Mod Podge matte across the entire piece of fabric, completely covering the area where the graphic is going to be placed. When using this technique, it's important to choose a fabric that can absorb the Mod Podge. Natural fabrics like cotton, linen, or cotton blends work best for this method to ensure that you're going to have an image transfer that's going to work properly. If you don't have any matte Mod Podge, you can also use a gloss formula. However, keep in mind that the gloss finish will be visible in your final product. If you don't want to wait around for it to dry, you can get out your hairdryer or your heat gun and speed up the process. Once that's dry, we're going to put on another coat of the Mod Podge, and while it's still wet, we're going to add our graphic on top. You have to make sure if you're using words on your graphic that you've reversed it. Then place a piece of parchment paper over the graphic and iron it on a medium setting. A Cricut iron works well, but also a household iron on medium heat will do the trick too. Give the graphic a good iron for about 60 seconds. Keep the parchment paper on top and keep moving that iron back and forth. Here's the magic part. Now we peel away this label sheet and voila, your graphic has been flawlessly transferred onto the fabric. Isn't this a fantastic way to do a transfer? It's clean, it's crisp and easy, and no rubbing required. And here's our finished frame with the fabric transfer beautifully displayed in the center. I absolutely love this texture created by the baking soda and vinegar technique. It truly adds an authentic vintage feel, don't you think? If you haven't tried this technique before, I highly recommend it. Let me know down in the comments how your project turns out. You want to learn how to create a clear crackle effect on your DIY projects like this? I have the perfect recipe for you. This technique is easy, but it's a little bit different than the previous crackle paint techniques because those involve paint on paint, whereas this technique uses a clear top coat so you can reveal that image underneath and it's going to look aged and crackled. It's fantastic, it's easy, and I'm going to show you how to do it. I have a round piece of wood that I've painted with some chalk paint, and we're going to decoupage this bee photo on top of it. This is available in my Etsy store. I'll put the link to it down in the description. Now I've printed this off on my inkjet printer, so we have to seal the ink or else it will run when we add our crackle technique on. I sprayed it with some hairspray, gave it a really good coat, and I've set it aside to dry. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to take my Mod Podge and apply it all over that wooden round. I'm going to put a nice thick coat on there so I can decoupage my graphic onto it. I'm going to center it exactly where I want it, press it down, and then I'm going to use my brayer to press it right into that piece of wood to ensure I have a really good contact seal. Once that's completely dry, I'm taking a little piece of sandpaper and sanding all around the edge. It creates a nice, neat sanded edge, and then we're going to be ready to start that crackle technique. What you're going to need for this project is some Liquitex acrylic medium. I picked up gloss, but any finish will work, and some school glue. You're also going to need some water, a dish, and spoon. I found the Liquitex at Hobby Lobby, and you can find it at any craft store, also on Amazon. I'll put the link down below in the description. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of water to 1 tablespoon of Elmer's school glue. You can use school glue that's white or the clear PVA glue, all will work. Then we're going to mix it together really well. Next, we're going to add 1 tablespoon of that gloss medium. And again, we're going to incorporate it together really well. You're going to take that mixture and paint it on top of your image. You're going to put it on quite thick. The more thicker you put it on, the more pronounced that crackle is going to be. So this is just something that you're going to have to play around with and see what you like for your project. If you have it on thin, you're going to get thinner crackles. If you put it on thicker, you're going to get thicker crackles. It's just something to experiment and have fun with. Try to get it on as evenly as you can, and once I've got this all done, we're going to set it aside and let it get tacky. If you would like to use your heat gun, just be really careful, moving it back and forth, and don't put it too close to your project so that the glue bubbles up. You know your craft is ready for the next step if you touch it and it doesn't come off on your finger, but it still feels tacky. Then you're ready to put on another coat of that Liquitex gloss medium. We're not using that glue and water mixture this time, just the gloss medium. We're going to spread it out evenly, trying not to mix it in too much, using long strokes and covering that entire piece of wood. When you apply the glue mixture over the picture, it forms a thin layer. As this layer dries, it contracts and hardens different than the layer beneath it. The difference in the drying rates cause that top layer to crack and separate, revealing that picture underneath. The cracking effect occurs due to the tension between the shrinking top layer and the more stable layer beneath it, resulting in such a really cool pattern of cracks across the surface. As you can see, all the crackles have formed already, but we're going to take it one step further. I'm going to use a little bit of acrylic paint in a nice brown color, and we're going to rub it on top of that image. It will soak down into those cracks, giving it a sepia look or a more age distressed look. This again is something that you can just test and get the look that you want to achieve, but how beautiful is this? It makes those cracks pop even more and gives that bee image the appearance of an old vintage piece of art. So have some fun trying out this recipe. It's affordable, it's easy to do, and I know you're gonna love it on your DIY projects. And again, I'll put the link to that gloss medium down below in the description and right here. own homemade chalk paint. You're going to need some plaster of Paris. You're going to need an empty container with a lid that seals really well. And you're going to need a measuring cup to mix everything together in. You want to grab some latex paint. That works the best for a chalk paint recipe. And you want to make sure your latex paint is matte or flat. I'm going to put 1 cup of that flat latex paint into a measuring cup, and then I'm going to take 1/3 of a cup of warm water, and then 1/3 of a cup of plaster of Paris. You can find plaster of Paris probably at your local hardware store. You can also find it on Amazon. And then you're going to take that plaster of Paris and you're going to incorporate it into that warm water and stir it really well together. It's going to be lumpy in the beginning, but just keep stirring and it'll go really smooth. This is the most important step of your chalk paint recipe, to incorporate that plaster of Paris really well into that warm water. I love using this chalk paint recipe on all of my projects. It adheres to any surface, and most of the time you don't have to prep or sand when you're using this. You can also use any color latex paint. You're not limited to only using white. I do find though that this recipe only has a shelf life for about a week, so I usually only try to make just as much that I need for a project. Once that plaster of Paris and water is mixed really well, then I am going to incorporate it into that 1 cup of latex paint and stir it really well. This is a 3-ingredient recipe to make your own homemade chalk paint, and it is so easy. Pour it into your container and then seal it up with your lid, and you're ready to get crafting. Looking to take your painting skills to the next level? My new painting booklet is just what you need. This is a downloadable, printable booklet featuring 11 of my favorite DIY paint recipes that are perfect for artists of any level. With step-by-step instructions and helpful tips, you can easily create your own paints using simple and affordable ingredients found in your home or probably at a local craft store. Plus, the booklet is convenient and easy to use. Simply download it, print it, and start painting. After I downloaded my booklet, I made it pretty with some scrapbook paper and tabs to make it easy to reference any recipe. This is available in my Etsy store, and I will put the link down in the description if you'd like to grab one for yourself. One of my absolute favorite painting techniques is salt wash paint. This incredible finish produces a chippy and layered effect, allowing you to transform a brand new piece of wood into a stunning antique-like piece. Today I'm going to demonstrate how I can take a piece of pine, turn it into an arrow, and use salt wash paint. First, I'm using my trusty jigsaw to cut out the arrow shape, sand it down, and now I'm applying a thin layer of stain. And then I'm going to put a layer of black and a layer of yellow. These colors are all going to be exposed when we finish this sign. Next comes the fun part. We're mixing up the salt wash paint. This is a straightforward process that involves combining 1 cup of latex paint with 2 heaping tablespoons of pickling salt and 1 heaping tablespoon of plaster of Paris. Once you've added all the ingredients together, you want to incorporate it. Stir it really well. It will be lumpy and thick, but that's precisely what we're aiming for. Keep stirring until all 3 ingredients are really mixed well together. Our stain and our paint are completely dry. Now we're going to apply our salt wash recipe on top of that. Now it's time to dive in with that paintbrush. Dip it into the salt wash paint and gently dab it up and down, creating that chippy layered effect. The key to nailing this technique is to avoid using brush strokes altogether. You want to go up and down with your paintbrush across that whole project. Do not incorporate that salt wash together with long strokes. I let that salt wash completely dry, and then I just painted over it with a coat of white chalk paint. Let that dry completely, and now we're going to sand it down. This can get really messy, so you want to make sure that you're doing this outside with a mask on and sand away. I'm using an 80 grit sandpaper, and you'll see as I'm sanding, I'm bringing up all of those different layers and it's looking chippy and layered. Now, once I had it sanded down, I thought I wanted to do another color. So I mixed up some of this turquoise paint into a salt wash, and I'm dabbing it up and down on top of that last layer that I did. That's the nice thing about this salt wash. You can just keep layering up different colors until you get the desired look that you're trying to achieve. The key to this is to make sure that you're letting every layer dry completely before you add the next layer, and making sure it's really dry before you sand it. So here's what I created. Here's my salt wash finish, and I love it. You can see all those colors peeking through. And to finish it off, I did my Mod Podge reverse graphics on it and turned it into this beautiful sign. You have to try out this painting technique. It's absolutely fabulous. Today we're going to be making chalkboard paint, and it's a simple, easy recipe. You only need 2 ingredients. You're going to need some black latex paint in either a flat or a satin finish, and some plaster of Paris. I've got 1 cup of that black latex paint in a glass jar, and I'm adding 2 heaping tablespoons of plaster of Paris. You can then use a stir stick or the back of a spoon and incorporate that plaster of Paris really well into that black latex paint. I find to get the best results, you have to use a latex paint. And you want to stir it really well together and making sure that there's no lumps and it's a nice creamy consistency. This recipe is perfect for any thrifted or upcycled projects that you have that you want to turn into a chalkboard. Once you have it mixed really well, you're going to keep it in an airtight sealed container, and it'll last for a few weeks. And as you can see, this is a simple, easy recipe for you to make your own chalkboard paint. When painting with your homemade chalkboard paint, I find that it takes 3 or 4 coats, letting it completely dry in between each coat. And then when it's completely dry, you want to season your chalkboard. Just take a piece of chalk and rub it all over top of that chalkboard paint, and then wipe it off, and then you're ready to write on your project. If you don't season your chalkboard, when you go to write on it and wipe it off, you'll still see the letters underneath. This is what you're going to need to make your coffee grind paint: a measuring spoon and a measuring cup, some warm water, some paint of choice, plaster of Paris, and some dried coffee grinds. You're going to add 1/4 cup of the plaster of Paris. And I actually have filled this up a little bit more than 1/4 cup. So I might need to add a little bit more water, but the recipe calls for 1/4 cup and 2 tablespoons of warm water. I'm going to mix this all together. And I do need to add a little bit more water because I overfilled my 1/4 cup a little bit. So I'm just going to put in another tablespoon of water because you want a nice creamy consistency. You want to make sure that you're using warm water so it dissolves the plaster of Paris really well. I'll have a link down below in the description where you can purchase plaster of Paris on Amazon. And this is what your plaster of Paris mixture should look like, nice and creamy. Now you're going to add 2 tablespoons of your paint of choice. You can use chalk paint, latex paint, acrylic paint, and any color. I like using a white because then when you are finished, you can have your coffee grinds show through. Incorporate the paint really well into the plaster of Paris mixture. And now you're going to add 1/4 cup of the coffee grinds. I actually took these out of my coffee maker, put them on a cookie sheet, and let them dry overnight. You don't want the moisture in the coffee grinds to be in this paint formula. Stir it really well, make sure it's all blended really well into that plaster of Paris and the paint mixture, and we're ready to use the paint.
Okay, it's all incorporated together, and this is a consistency that it should look like when all of the coffee grinds are all mixed in with the plaster of Paris and the paint. And this is the vase that's going to get the makeover. I picked it up at the thrift store for a couple bucks, and it needed to be freshened up. So this coffee grind paint is going to be perfect for it. And we're ready to get painting. And you can use this paint on any project, on wood, on glass, on ceramics. Just use your imagination and give it a try. Now I'm using long strokes, just trying to get the coffee grinds kind of evenly dispersed throughout the project. Later on the next coat, you can kind of pat it on, but this first coat, you just want to liberally paint the whole vase. And you can already tell how fabulous this texture is going to be. And if you guys have never used one of these Wooster paintbrushes, they are amazing for craft projects. I'll put a link below down in the description so you can check them out on Amazon because they're a really neat crafting paintbrush. And I got the first coat completely done and it looks really great. I love the texture of it, and now we're just going to let it dry completely before we put on the second coat. Now when you're putting on the second coat, just do long strokes, and wherever you see there might be a little spot where you need to add some more texture, you can dab it on with this paintbrush, and just, it doesn't have to look perfect. That's not the idea of this kind of paint. You just want it to kind of look very rustic and very old and antique. So just dab away, paint, and it'll look fabulous when it's all dry. And to finish off this second coat, I'm just going to take my side of my paintbrush and just kind of dab all over the whole vase just to give it a little bit more texture. And if you see any spots that need a little bit extra paint or a little bit extra of the coffee grinds, just dab it on. At the end of the video, I'll have the recipe so you can take a screenshot of it, and I'll also have a link down in the description. Okay, I've let this dry completely, and now I want to take my sanding block. This is like a 120 sanding block, and I'm just going to gently sand the whole vase. And what this is going to do is it's just going to take that paint off the little edges of the coffee grinds and let that brown of the coffee grind kind of peek through. And I have it all sanded down, and it looks wonderful. I love the way the little bit of the coffee grind kind of shows through that brown, and it makes it look really antique. Now when using this paint, I like to seal it with a polyacrylic sealer. I'm using the Varathane matte finish, and I'm just going to put a liberal coat over the whole vase. I find if you don't do this with this paint technique, the coffee grinds kind of have a tendency to kind of fall and flake off a little bit, and this seals everything in nice and tight. You also might find that you have a little bit of a coffee odor, and by putting the polyacrylic on top of it, it will get rid of all of that smell. Not that it's a bad smell because I love coffee, but it just, if you're putting it in your living room and somebody's sitting beside it, you don't want it to have that coffee odor. So by putting the polyacrylic on top of it, it will seal it all up and eliminate all of that smell. This is what you're going to need to create sawdust paint: a measuring cup and a measuring spoon, an empty container, some plaster of Paris, some sawdust that I just collected from my chop saw, a little bit of water, and your paint of choice. You can use latex or acrylic. This is a tester that I bought from Home Depot, and you can have it mixed to any color that you want. This one's Rusty Gate, and I love it. It's a real nice terracotta color. The first thing that we're going to do is put half a cup of the plaster of Paris into the empty container.
You can find plaster of Paris at any local hardware store, and you can also get it on Amazon. I'll put the link down below in the description. And to start off, we're going to put 2 tablespoons into the plaster of Paris, and you want to mix it really well. You don't want any lumps, or you want a real nice smooth consistency. I don't like putting all of the water in right off the bat, so I mix the 2 tablespoons, and then once I have that incorporated, I'm going to put in 2 more tablespoons. So that'll be 4 tablespoons in total. And once again, just mix it really, really well. You want a real smooth consistency, no lumps of plaster of Paris, and just nice and smooth. And this tester is from Behr. It's the Marquee series, and I got it in eggshell. You want to use either a satin or an eggshell. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons into the plaster of Paris mixture. I will have the recipe at the end of the video where you can take a screenshot of it and you can save it in your files. And then you're going to incorporate that paint right into that plaster of Paris mixture. Give it a really, really good stir, and doing this recipe, it might lighten up the color of the paint just a little bit, so take that into account if you want a specific color. And this is what it should look like once it's all mixed together. And now comes the fun part. We're going to add in the sawdust. To begin with, I'm going to put in 2 heaping tablespoons of sawdust into the paint mixture. And then stir that in really well. You'll see that you'll start to get some texture in that paint now. I always have lots of sawdust here in my workshop from me cutting wood all the time, but if you have a hard time sourcing it, if you go to your local hardware store, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to give you some sawdust. I'm just going to add 2 more heaping tablespoons of the sawdust into that, so it's going to be 4 tablespoons in total. And it looks like I got a little piece of a twig that got stuck in the sawdust. Give it a really, really good stir. Get all that sawdust all incorporated right through the whole paint mixture. And you can see the texture that it has. It's just fabulous. And I'm going to use this sawdust paint on this big planter that I got out of the dump. It actually has a big crack in the back. I'm not worried about that because it's going to be at the back and you won't see it once it's all finished. To buy a planter like this, they're so expensive, so I was happy just to find it even with a crack in it, and I know I can fix it up and make it look beautiful. I'm just giving it a real good wipe down and cleaning it all up before I paint it. And if you guys have never used these little Wooster paintbrushes, they are fabulous. They fit in your hand so well, and they're so great for painting. I'll put a link down below and you can check that out because you definitely need one in your stash. And I'm just going to apply a coat over the whole pot. And as you're painting this on, you'll see all the texture that it creates. I have done quite a few other videos on different textured paints. I've done a coffee grind paint, I've done a sand paint, and I've done a salt and pepper paint technique. So I'll put the links down below in the description. Head over there after this video and check them out because all of these finishes create a little bit of a different texture and they're lots of fun. Okay, I've got the first coat completely done and we're just gonna let it dry. It's all dry and we're ready for the second coat. And when you're putting on your second coat, just do some long brush strokes and also just kind of tap it on in places, and it just gives it a little bit more texture. When you're mixing up these textured paints, only mix up what you need for your actual project. They don't store very well and they dry out really quickly. So if you need to mix a little bit more, then do that instead of mixing a whole bunch and not being able to use it all. And look at all of that texture. second coat's all finished, and that's all it's going to need. It won't need a third coat. It looks perfect. And now I'm going to let it completely dry. Now I want to mimic the white powdery substance that comes sometimes on terracotta pots. So I'm going to mix a really thin white paint, just like a really thin whitewash. I'm just adding a little bit of the white latex paint into about half a cup of water and stirring it really well. And then I'm going to brush it onto the terracotta pot and then wipe it off immediately, and it'll leave that white film on the pot. And you don't want very much on your paintbrush, so I'm just dabbing off the excess onto a piece of paper, and then I'm going to brush it right onto the pot and then get a cloth and immediately wipe it off. And you'll see it just leaves that white film that you sometimes see on terracotta pots, and it just makes this look more like a real terracotta. I always get excited when I can pull something out of the dump that was meant to be just taken to the landfill, and I can pull it out and take something really crappy looking and make it pretty again. And I think this is going to be really successful. And it's all finished, and I'm really happy with it. So if you have a chance, try out this sawdust paint technique and let me know what you think down in the comments. And this is what you're going to need to create your project. Some stencils, a tablespoon, a plastic container. I'm going to use some acrylic paint. You can also use latex paint, Elmer's school glue, and some baking soda. The first thing you're going to do is add 3 tablespoons of baking soda. I've tried a lot of different recipes, and I prefer this one with the baking soda. I've seen other girls do it with the baby powder, but I prefer this one. And then you're going to add 1 tablespoon of the Elmer's school glue. And this recipe will save in an airtight container. So if you have some left over after you've done your project, seal it up really well with the lid, and it'll stay really good for a long time. And then you're going to add 1 tablespoon of your paint of choice. I'm using acrylic, but you can also use a latex paint or a chalk paint. And then you want to stir really well, incorporate all those ingredients all together. And what this textured paste does is when you apply it to a project, it leaves a raised finish. And there's so many possibilities with it. I've seen it used on furniture, on signs, on paper. You just can be so creative with it. A lot of people use this textured paste for their mixed media art. It's very popular. And this is the texture that it should be when it's completely all mixed together. It's almost like a tar mixture. And if you want it thicker, you can always add a little bit more baking soda, or if you want it thinner, you can always thin it out. It's your preference of how much of a texture you want in your paste. Now the project that I'm going to do today, I'm going to use my stencils and create 3 tiles for a wall hanging. I got these stencils off of Amazon. I'll put a link down below. They were a fantastic deal, and you get 12 different mandala kind of graphics. Now to make sure that my stencils stay adhered to my wood tiles really well, I'm going to use a little bit of the spray adhesive. It just helps hold it down a little bit. You don't have to do this step. You can tape your stencil down, or if you're comfortable, you can just hold it really steady when you apply the paste. And to apply the paste, I like to use a little credit card. I find that I have a lot of control with that. I've seen girls use some putty knives or scrapers. I prefer the credit card. Make sure you have your stencil completely in the center of your project. Press it down firmly, and then we're ready to put on the paste. And I'm just going to apply a little bit on that credit card and then just scrape it over the top of that stencil. And you don't want to scrape it right down. You want to have some texture to it. So you want it on quite thick, and just drag it right across until you get to the bottom. And you want to make sure you have your paste distributed evenly so it's not high in one spot and low in the other. And that's what I like about the credit card, is you can kind of feel if there's any high spots and you can get it nice and smooth. Now it's kind of hard with the camera, but as you can see, it's kind of got a thick texture over the top of that whole stencil. And now comes the fun part. Peel away that stencil and look at the beautiful graphic that you have on that piece of wood. And you can see the raised texture on the stencil, and don't worry about it kind of dripping off on the ends. We're going to clean that up afterwards. But isn't this fantastic? Okay, and now I'm going to work away on my other two tiles. I'm going to have the recipe at the end of the video, so hang out until the end, take a screenshot of it, and you can save it in your files. I have all three of my wooden tiles done. I'm going to set them aside and let them dry thoroughly. Now here's a little tip or trick. Don't take those stencils down and wash all that paste off it yet. Put it on a piece of paper, press it down, use up that paint, and then you have some really pretty paper that you can use on some other projects another day. I like pressing down the stencil a couple different times, get all the paint off of it, because each time it gives it a little bit of a different look. These little imprints would be great for making cards or doing any mixed media art. And these are all the little pieces that I created with all the stencils that I used. So pretty. Okay, these wooden tiles have completely dried, and I took my sandpaper, and I cleaned up all of the edges where the paint had dripped off a little bit, and now we're ready to finish off the project. It's really hard to show you the raised stencils on the camera, but it really does create a really nice texture with this paste. And I found an old piece of barn board that fit 3 of these tiles perfectly, so I'm going to glue them down onto the board, put a hanger on the back, and I think it's going to look wonderful hung on the wall. And I'm just going to glue them down with my hot glue gun. I like the Gorilla Glue sticks, and it bonds really well, so that's what I'm using today. And it's all finished, and I can't wait to hang it up on the wall. And as I said before, these stencils, I've put the link down in my description. They're available on Amazon. There's 12 of them in the pack, and these mandalas are gorgeous. So if you haven't tried making texture paste before and using it in your crafts, give it a try. You won't be disappointed. And this is what you're going to need to create your sand paint. You're going to need some plaster of Paris, some warm water, your paint of choice. You can use the acrylic, latex, or chalk paint, some sand, and just something to mix and measure with. You're going to use
1/4 of a cup of plaster of Paris, 2 tablespoons of warm water. Make sure your water is warm because it will mix in with the plaster of Paris much better. And you're going to stir it really well and make sure it's all mixed together so it's nice and smooth. Now, if you're working on a bigger project, you can always double or triple this recipe. It's just something that if you are mixing it up, you want to make sure you use it right away because it does not store very well and it will harden up. So that's the texture that you're looking for. And I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of the acrylic paint. And like I said before, you can use acrylic paint, you can use latex paint. I would make sure that you use an eggshell or a satin in the latex, or you can use your chalk paint. And you can pick any color that you want for this project. I picked this color because I wanted to have kind of a terracotta finish when I put it on my vase. And mix that paint really well into that plaster in Paris and water mixture. And the last step is to add the sand. Now we have some sand in our yard, so that's what I'm using. And your texture of your paint will be determined by the sand that you're using. So if you're using a really fine sand, you'll have a fine texture. If you're using a really coarse sand, then you'll have more of a coarse paint when you're finished. And I'm going to put in 4 tablespoons into this mixture. I'm going to give it a little stir after the first 2 before I add the next 2 tablespoons. And if you're using your own sand, you want to make sure that you dry it out completely before you use it. You don't want any more moisture going into this recipe than what it's called for. And this is the consistency that it should be. It's almost like a wet cement consistency. I will have the recipe at the end of the video where you can take a screenshot of it at the very end, or you can go down in the link in the description and I'll have the recipe down there too. And there's your finished sand paint, all ready to be put on a project. I'm going to be painting this vase I found at a thrift store. It looks like somebody may have tried to spray paint it a little bit, so I've just washed it really well, got off any film or anything that might have been on it, and then I'm going to paint the sand paint directly onto the vase. And I'm hoping to get a nice terracotta feel to this project. You do not need to prime when using this paint recipe. It adheres to just about any surface, so you can paint directly right on your project without any prep. And this is what it looks like. It's nice and gritty and has lots of texture. And there's not really any sort of technique when painting with this. You just slap it on. You can kind of chunk it on and up and down, and it doesn't matter if you have lumps here and there, because when it's all finished, that's the look that we're trying to achieve. I have the first coat all finished, and you want to make sure you let it completely dry before you put your second coat on. And you can see it kind of changes color as it dries, so you'll know when it's completely dry. Okay, my vase is completely dry and we're going to put on a second coat. And the same thing, you're not any sort of technique, just spread it on and let the chunks end up where they end up and brush it on and cover all the areas of the whole vase. Okay, the second coat is on, And it's all finished, so now I have to just be patient and let it dry completely. It's all finished and I love the way it dried and the way it looks. It looks like an old terracotta planter, and I have a feeling I'm going to be painting every glass jar I have in my home. What you're going to need for this recipe is some baking powder. Make sure you're not using baking soda because you'll have a completely different texture when you mix up your paint. You want the baking powder. If you're a baker, you know the difference between baking soda and baking powder. The baking powder, when you introduce it to any sort of a water substance, it will rise and go fluffy. So that's what we want to create with this paint. And I just picked up a tester paint container at Home Depot, and I picked out a really nice terracotta color. This is called Sunset Bear, and it's just a matte latex paint. You can also do this with acrylic paint and it works well. And then you just need a little container to mix your recipe in. When you mix the baking powder into the latex paint, it will start to fluff up and it kind of gives this moussey kind of textured paint. Now, the only thing is when you're mixing this up, only mix it up for what you need for that certain project. This does not store well. It will thicken right up and be no good after you've mixed it up after about an hour. So only mix up what you're going to use for that specific project. Now you can adjust this recipe to how much fluffiness you want in your paint. I have the best results with 1 tablespoon of the baking powder mixed into about half a cup of latex paint. I'm now going to put in about half a cup of the latex paint. And like I said, it doesn't have to be completely accurate. You can adjust it for how much fluffiness you want in your paint. You will notice as soon as you start mixing it, it's going to fluff right up and give like a moussey kind of consistency. And that's what you want. That's what you want the baking powder to do in your paint. Just make sure you mix it up really, really well. And if you want to have it a little bit fluffier, you can always add a little bit more into the recipe if you want to. But you can see the consistency. See how it's fluffing right up? That's what you want it to do. Okay, so now we're going to get painting our vase. I've cleaned my glass vase really well with soap and water, and then I took some alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and I cleaned it off really well to make sure that there's no grease or grime that was left on it. And I'm just going to use just a simple little chip brush, and you just paint your vase. And you're probably wondering, okay, well, what's the difference between a baking soda paint and a baking powder paint and a chalk paint? The chalk paint, you're using plaster of Paris, and it will adhere to any surface with minimal prep. You don't have to prep much of the surface at all. Baking soda paint gives kind of a grainy texture, almost like sand in your paint when you're mixing it. And this baking powder paint gives it kind of a fluffy, kind of ceramic look to your projects. So it's just kind of one of those things that you just kind of play around and see what texture you like the best and just start painting your projects. I'm just going to finish putting on the first coat, and then we want to seal the container of the unused paint really well because it will dry really fast and then you won't be able to use it again when you're putting on your next coat. So I've got this almost finished. I'm going to set it aside and we're going to let it dry really well, and then we're going to put on our second coat. I've got the first coat on and you can see kind of the fluffy texture to it. I just love this paint recipe. Okay, it's going to probably take a couple hours to dry. And if you really love this paint color, there's the code right there. And this is the type of paint that I bought.
This is drying really well. And when you do a project like this, a vase, you want to make sure that you paint in here too, so it looks, you can't see the glass and it looks like it's an actual ceramic pot. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that. And as you can see, this is probably about an hour and a half later. You can see how my paint has fluffed right up. And it's starting to thicken a little bit. So we don't have a whole lot of shelf time left with this. So I'm just kind of hoping that it dries really well before it dries right up. So I'm just gonna put a real good coat on the inside of this vase. I've got the inside all painted, and now I'm gonna paint another coat on the whole outside. And you just want to just layer it on. It's gonna look kind of thick, as you can see, but I love that texture. So I'm just gonna work away and put a second coat on this whole vase. I've got it all coated with a second coat, and I don't have too much left. I actually kind of measured this really well. But what I'm going to do, I think I'm gonna let it dry and put the rest of this on as a third coat. But I want to create a little bit more texture. So while it's still wet, I'm just going to go around and just dab the whole vase with my paintbrush. And it just gives it a little bit more texture. And this is what it looks like after you've dabbed that paintbrush on it. The second coat has completely dried. You can see the texture that it gives. And I had a little bit of paint left over. But you can see how it's really thickened up and it's started to not really be able to use that well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use up the last of it and put a real thick coat all over the base of the vase. I love the texture that this baking powder paint has made. Fantastic. My vase is completely dry, and I love the texture that this baking powder paint made. Now I want to turn this into more of a terracotta look. So I've got a little bit of acrylic paint, and I'm just going to take a sponge and just kind of sponge it just to take away a little bit of that stark kind of terracotta color and make it look like an old vintage terracotta pot. I am really enjoying making the baking powder paint. I'm loving the texture that it gives, and I think this glass vase upcycled beautifully. If you've never tried this painting technique, give it a try, because it's really easy to create fantastic DIY projects. First thing that we're going to do is add a 1/4 cup of warm water to a bowl to mix in. And then we're going to take the school glue and we're going to do 1/8 cup. So it's 2 parts water to 1 part glue. And then we're going to incorporate that really well together. I like to do that with a fork so it really mixes it well like a whisk. You may be wondering, what is gesso and why do we need it? Gesso is an important step to get your canvas or project ready for painting. You can buy gesso ready-made at the art supply store, but it can get really expensive, and it primes the surface for painting. Without gesso, the paint would soak into the weave of the canvas or the grain of the wood. Now, I've seen recipes where they use plaster of Paris, but sometimes it can be really hard to find, and I wanted to make this recipe easy for everyone. You can use cornstarch or you can use baby powder. Both of these work really well. I've tried both. Today's recipe, I'm going to use the cornstarch. So once the glue is really incorporated into that water, we're going to slowly put in the cornstarch until you get a pancake batter consistency. That's what we're aiming for. So there's not really a set amount of cornstarch or baby powder that you put into this recipe. You just add it really slowly, whisking it with a fork so it's nice and smooth until it looks like pancake batter. Gesso dries really hard, making the surface more stiff. And the beauty of gesso is that it can be applied to nearly any surface, much like a primer, and then you can paint on that surface. And this is a cheap alternative to make your own gesso, and I find it works just as well for a fraction of the cost. We're now going to add 1 tablespoon of white acrylic paint. Now you can add any color of acrylic paint if you want your gesso to be tinted, but I mainly just use white. So that's 1 tablespoon, and we're going to incorporate it really well into that cornstarch and water mixture. It's all incorporated really well together, looks like pancake batter, and we are ready to paint with our gesso. You want to seal it in an airtight container. This is just a glass jar that I got out of my recycling bin that had some instant coffee in it. And I'm going to show you, this is a really neat trick on how to make labels for your glass jars so we can remember that this has gesso in it. Now this little trick will only work on a LaserJet printer, but I printed off homemade gesso on a sheet of paper with my LaserJet printer. I'm taking some packing tape and I'm going to lay it right on top of that and then cut it down to size. And then we're going to put it in some warm water and let it soak for about 30 seconds. This is a really great packing tape hack that you can use for your glass jars or your glass bottles to label them. And then we're just going to rub off the paper on the back, and the graphics are going to stay, but the paper is going to rub off all of the rest of that packing tape, and it's going to be sticky, and you're going to be able to stick it on your jar so you'll know what's inside of it. Now we're just going to stick it on the glass jar, and it's good to go, and we're going to know there's homemade gesso in it, and we're going to fill it up. So you want to make sure that you apply 2 coats of the gesso to your project, making sure it's really smooth. You can sand between each coat if you think it needs it, and this will create a smooth, absorbent surface for you to paint on. A common question regarding gesso is if you really need it. Technically you don't, but it does provide a nice, slightly more absorbent surface for you to work on. When you're painting on top of gesso, it does make your colors pop more on your projects. I hope today's tutorial was helpful, and you can now make homemade gesso at a fraction of the cost. I'm going to show you how I made mine. I've used this a few times to test it, and it worked fabulous. So this is how I made it. This is just plaster of Paris, and I added water just to make it a nice paste. And these ingredients are all equal amount. So equal amount plaster of Paris and water into a paste, to polyacrylic water-based sealer. I'm using satin, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. It doesn't have to be exact. And then she used, when she did hers, a primer. And this paint is a paint and primer in one. I've tested it and it worked fantastic. And I also found, I did try it with the primer and it changed the color of the paint a little bit, and I didn't care for that. I wanted to keep the paint the same color. So by using the plaster of Paris and the primer, it lightened it up too much for what I liked. So I'm just going to add in my paint now. This is just a satin Gildan paint. We're going to mix it all up together, and that's it. That's all you need to do to create some paint that is only one step. You don't have to worry about prep. You don't have to worry about putting on a top coat afterwards. This is all in one, ready to go. I've tested it on a couple of projects. It worked fantastic, and you need to try this. I've got a little table that I'm going to do right now, and we're going to work away on that. This is the little table that we're going to paint. It's in pretty rough shape. The top is really stained. There was little bits missing in all these little round holes. I'm going to fill that up with some wood filler, but it's got really pretty legs on it, and I think I only paid a couple dollars for it at the thrift store. I love the yellow color that I've picked out to paint this, and we're going to get started. I'm going to fill in all these little circles with some wood filler, and then let it dry completely, sand it down. I probably won't be able to get it perfect, but it'll be better than it is right now. That took a lot of wood filler to get it all nice and even. It's not perfect, but I think I'm going to do some decoupage on the top anyway, so it all blend in. But I'm going to put this up on my table now and start painting. I am loving this yellow color. I seem to be really drawn to it lately, and I've got quite a few pieces now that I've painted in it, and I always love the way that it turns out. So I'm just going to put a real good coat over this whole table. And the nice thing about this paint is we don't have to prep, and we also don't have to put a top coat on when it's all done. I got one coat on completely over the whole thing. I'm going to set it aside and let it dry really well. After it's really dry, we'll come back and I'm going to show you how hard it is already after one coat. Okay, this is completely dry, and I'm just going to show you how durable it is already after that first coat. It's painting really well. It's probably going to take 3 coats though, because it was such a dark wood with such a stain on it. So I'm going to keep working away at it. When it's all done and dry, we'll come back and I'll show you how my one-step paint worked out. I have only tested this on wooden pieces of furniture and small thrifted stuff. I've never tested it on glass. So I'm going to try it, see how it adheres to glass, and we'll see what the results are. I've washed this really well, taken the label off, and then I've wiped it down with an alcohol wipe. I actually have a really good tutorial on how to get the labels off of glass. I tested a whole bunch of different products and methods and came up with the easiest one. You might want to check that out after you've watched this video. So I'm just going to put my first coat on the glass jar. First coat is all dry, and actually I'm really impressed. This is just as good as my other method. So my other method that I was doing to paint glass, I was giving it a real light spritz of a primer and then putting my chalk coat on top. But this might eliminate that spray paint. This might be my new go-to. Second coat is all dry. The last coat, I always like to use a little sponge to put it on. It works really great if you have any streaks or anywhere where you want to cover it up really well. So I'm just going to work away at that. This is definitely an option to paint glass. I love the durability of it, and it covered really well. I just added a little bit of burlap, put some faux plant in it, and added one of my homemade tags. It turned out cute. This is durable. It worked fantastic. Just that little bit of a tweak where I didn't add the primer like she did, but the paint and the primer were together, so I think that worked well. And then I didn't have to lighten it up by adding the white primer. The only change that I would have made was I only have right now the matte finish polyacrylic, and it kind of gives it a dull finish, almost like a chalk paint finish, right? So I would probably add in a gloss if you're doing furniture, and then you would get more of a glossy finished look to it. Other than that, wow, it is durable. No need to prime and then paint and then put a top coat on. You can get it all done in one shot. After I filled in all those holes with the wood filler and then I painted it, it actually covered really well. I know I had said that maybe I was going to decoupage on top of this. I'm not. It looks fantastic. I'm just going to leave it.
Properly prepare the board for painting, I begin by creating a surface that the paint's going to easily adhere to. I sanded the board with 80 grit sandpaper to make it easier for the paint to stick, and then I used a hammer to create some dents and notches to make it look more old-fashioned. Once I finished that, I painted it with one coat of my homemade black chalk paint. We are now ready to mix together our salt wash paint. I'm using half a cup of latex paint, half a tablespoon of plaster of Paris, and 1 tablespoon of pickling salt. You can double the recipe if you need more. And you can use any type of salt. The more coarse, the more chippy effect you're going to have. Now we want to thoroughly mix the ingredients together until there's no lumps or clumps in the mixture. The key to this technique is in the application method. Rather than brushing the paint on, gently dab that paintbrush up and down to achieve the desired texture. It's crucial to avoid using paint strokes, as this can mix that paint in with that salt and it's going to ruin that salt wash effect. Instead, gently dab that paintbrush up and down to create the desired texture. Be sure to fully saturate that paintbrush with paint and apply it generously over the entire board. It's essential to allow the first coat to dry completely before proceeding to the next step. Once the salt wash paint has dried, you can put it out in the sun or leave it for a few hours or even overnight. It's time to apply another coat in a contrasting color. This technique allows for endless possibilities as you can layer multiple colors and each board will have a unique and distinct appearance. It's always exciting to see the final outcome as you never quite know what you're going to get. If you're interested, I have a booklet available in my Etsy store with all of my favorite painting recipes. You can easily download and print them out on your computer at home, and it's a handy reference to have all the recipes in one place when you're ready to start crafting. I'll put that link down below in the description and you can check it out if you're interested. I'm now going to set this aside and let it dry completely, and you can see the texture that we're creating already with that salt that's incorporated into this paint recipe. I tend to get carried away with this technique and enjoy seeing different colors peeking through. You don't have to use as many colors if you don't want to, but personally, I love layering as many colors as possible to achieve a beautiful chippy texture. Of course, you can just use 1 or 2 colors if that's your preference. The end result is what matters, and this technique always delivers stunning and unique results. All my colors are completely dry, and now I'm brushing on some homemade white chalk paint to finish the process. Now that it's completely dry, let's get back to work. Using a scraper, we're going to scrape away all the areas where we applied salt. This will reveal the underlying colors of paint, creating a beautiful effect as we scrape away that top layer. You're going to see all the colors that we use, the red, the black, the yellow, the turquoise, along with that natural wood underneath. This process is incredibly satisfying and rewarding as we uncover that beautiful wood and texture and chippy finish underneath. We're going to sand the board now to smooth it out, and I'm using my palm sander with an 80 grit sandpaper to go over the entire surface. It can get pretty dusty, so make sure you do it outside in a well-ventilated area and wear a mask for safety. As you can see, we've easily created a vintage chippy looking piece of wood using salt wash paint, and now it's time to turn it into a sign. This is my go-to transfer method using Mod Podge for reverse graphics, and I'm excited to use all 3 of these coffee graphics on this sign. You can find all of these graphics in my Etsy store. I'll leave the link down below in the description. I resized my graphics in my Word program to fit the sign, and now we're using a light coat of Mod Podge matte on each graphic. If you're not familiar with how to resize graphics, I have a helpful tutorial linked in the description below. I love this technique because it doesn't require any vinyl or stencils or expensive materials. All you need is a printer, either a LaserJet or an inkjet, and some computer paper, Mod Podge, and a little bit of patience to create stunning signs with this method. After 24 hours, I'm dampening the graphic with a sponge and water until it becomes visible and you can see the words or the graphic underneath. Then I'm going to start rubbing off the paper. This technique requires some practice and patience, so don't get discouraged if you're new to it. Take your time, work in small sections, and use only a little bit of water and rub it until all of the paper is removed. If you can master this technique, the possibilities are endless. It's really satisfying to take a piece of scrap wood that was just laying around and probably going to be burnt in a wood pile and turn it into something beautiful with some paints and graphics. This technique is also a great way to make some extra money by selling your DIY projects, so don't be afraid to get creative and give this a try if you haven't. And to finish it off, I sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer. And here's the final product, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. The salt wash paint chippy texture adds a unique charm to the sign, which complements the coffee graphics perfectly. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I can part with it. It may just have to find a spot in my own home.
And this is what you're going to need to make your own DIY stain. I'm just using some scrap pieces of pine, a water bottle, a dish with some water in it, a little sponge, or you can use a paintbrush, a measuring spoon, and your paint of choice to mix. I like using the acrylic, but you can also use latex. So this mixture is 2 to 1. So you're going to use 2 teaspoons to 1 teaspoon of paint. And you can mix it the 2 to 1 ratio for whatever project you're going to be using it on. You can mix more or less. And you want to mix it really well together, and it should be a real watery consistency. I love making my own stain, and there's so many colors that you can choose from. If you were to go and buy all those stains from Minwax or another stain company, it would cost you a lot of money. This way you can get a really nice effect a lot cheaper. Now I like to spray my wood with a little bit of water before I apply the stain, and we're just gonna dampen up a little bit of the excess water there, and I just find that the stain goes on smoother. This seems like a really easy process, and it is, but there's a lot of new crafters out there, and every little tip and trick helps along the way. So I'm hoping that I'm helping people find an alternative to using a wood stain. After I've applied it all over the wood, I just like to take a cloth and then just wipe off the excess stain that I've made, and you'll see how the grain shows through really nice. Now I'm just going to go through and do 5 other colors of different stains, and you can just watch and see how wonderful they turn out. And make sure you stay tuned to the very end, because what I make with these little wooden box is really cool. And the nice thing about this technique is if you don't think that it's dark enough or you want a little bit of a darker stain, you can always reapply until you get the color that you want. And there you have your DIY stain, and each color looks so fabulous, and it brings out the grain and all of the wood, and it's made just with your stash of acrylic paint. Now I'm going to make these into little signs, so I've taken them outside to my shed and I've given them a good sanding to give them a rustic look, and I'm going to do my Mod Podge reverse transfer method on these. I have a couple tutorials that go more into depth on how to do this technique. I'll put the link below in the description for those, and you can check those out afterwards.
you guys ever have something that has been in your shed or in your garage, you never really wanted to throw it out because you didn't really know what you were going to do with it, but it was too good to throw away? That's what happened with this piece of wood. I have had it for a long time. Never really knew what I wanted to do with it, but I loved it because it was chippy and kind of fun, and it's actually, I think, off of a barn door. And today I decided what I was going to do with it. So stay tuned.
I decided today that these little blocks will fit perfect in each one of these squares and make a beautiful sign for my wall. I'm just going to arrange them where I think the colors look the best, and then I'm going to glue them down. And I'm just using some of my Gorilla wood glue and my hot glue gun to make sure they're secured really well. And there you have the finished product. Using scrap pieces of pine with my homemade DIY wood stain, and I made them into little quote signs and added them to a piece of junk wood that I've had forever. And I think it turned out fabulous. Let me know what you think down in the comments.
Today we're making cloud dough, and it is so simple. It's only 2 ingredients, and your kids, your grandkids, the littles are gonna love making this. Let's get the ingredients together and start making some DIY cloud dough. You're gonna need a bowl, a measuring cup, a fork, some cornstarch, and some hair conditioner. And it doesn't matter what type of hair conditioner, it will all work. We're going to use 1 cup of cornstarch, and you're gonna pour it into that bowl. I love that it's soft and it's squishy, and it's also less messy than regular Play-Doh, and it's easier to clean up. Now we're going to take 1/4 cup of the hair conditioner, and we're going to add it into that cornstarch and then incorporate it together with a fork. And let the kids come in and help you mix up this recipe. It might get a little bit messy while you're putting it together, but it'll be a lot of fun. We're just going to keep incorporating it together until all of that hair conditioner gets absorbed into the cornstarch. And you can adjust this recipe as you go. You can add more hair conditioner if it seems to be a little bit crumbly, or you can add more cornstarch if you find that it just feels like it's too liquid. Just play around with it until you find the right consistency of Play-Doh. Now this step you can skip if you don't want to, but I always like to add a little bit of food coloring. This is just some gel food coloring, and I'm just going to add just a tiny little bit with a skewer, and it's just going to make it a really bright pink color. But most of the time hair conditioners already have a color in them, and that will show through in the Play-Doh. But you can see as we're incorporating this together, it's a lot more fun being bright pink. Cloud dough is a fun and safe activity for children who won't put it in their mouths. It's perfect for sensory play and can be used for sculpting, building, and other creative activities. Just remember to supervise your children while they play and make sure to wash their hands afterwards. I'm finding this is a little bit wet still, so I've added some more cornstarch, and I'm just going to keep incorporating it until it gets to be the texture that I'm happy with. I don't find that there's any substitutions that work better than cornstarch, so I wouldn't use something else instead. Now we're going to take our hands, leaving it still in the bowl, and start to knead it until it starts to form into a ball. And there you have 2 ingredient cloud dough that you can make with your kids. Store it in an airtight container and it'll last up to a week. Let's make slime. This simple recipe uses 3 ingredients: glue, salt, and water. We're going to pour 1 cup of water into a microwavable dish. And now you're going to take 1 cup of clear Elmer's glue or any type of PVA glue. Now this step is optional, but I love to add a little bit of food coloring to just make the slime a fun color to play with. I'm just using a skewer, and you don't need very much. Just add a tad and you'll see that it's going to color the water, and keep adding it until you get what you like. Now we're going to add 2 tablespoons of salt.
Now we're going to incorporate those ingredients together, and you're going to notice as you're stirring that it's going to start to go clumpy, and that's what we want it to do. Keep stirring and incorporate that salt into that glue really well. Now we're going to take it and put it in our microwave for 2 minutes. And this is what it looks like after being in the microwave for 2 minutes. The water has separated from the glue and the salt, and we are starting to create that slime. Now we're going to take another bowl and a strainer, and we're going to put that slime mixture into the strainer. We want to remove all of that water. Keep stirring with a fork to remove as much water as you can from this mixture. And we're almost done making some safe and fun slime. This recipe uses only non-toxic ingredients, so you can play with it without any worries. Now we're going to get into this with our hands and just start squishing out even more water. This is a great recipe to make with your kids too. They'll have lots of fun squishing the water out of this and feeling it turn into slime so quickly. You can make your slime even more fun by adding glitter or scented oils. Just add a little bit at a time and mix it in until you're happy with the result. And there we have homemade slime with simple ingredients that you probably already have in your craft room or at home. So get the kids involved and try this recipe today. After you finish playing with it, store in an airtight container and it'll last a long time. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we're going to see you in the next video. And if you love this video, I'm sure you're going to really love either of these next two. Take care.